super excited for the webinar series. When we wanted to give a forum for just sharing kind of some of our knowledge or kind of skill set with you all to help you do your job, but also give you a forum to kind of ask us questions. It won't always be me, unfortunately, on the webinar, but no, Iggy is here as well, but it'll be a number of different team members from Adigy, and sometimes from outside Adigy on these pseudo talks, here to answer, help you guys with macOS or Apple questions, making your jobs easier, hopefully, and providing a forum to kind of ask questions you may be struggling with or issues you may be encountering, so on and so forth. So let's get started here. So this specific session is going to be talking about virtualizing and testing with macOS, specifically with macOS, and not specifically with iOS, because it's pretty much impossible to virtualize and test with macOS. With iOS, I'm sorry, mainly because it really all you can do is simulate iOS. You can't really virtualize iOS at this point. But we look forward to the day when you possibly can. So on to introductions. I have the privilege of leading the operations and security team here at Adigy. My name is Nicholas Ponce. You can find me in MacAdmin Slack under Ponce, or our Adigy integrations channel under Nicholas Ponce. So happy to address or talk to you in any one of those mediums. I'm also in a couple of other Slack workspaces like MSP Geek and IT Pool Party and a few of the other ones. So feel free to reach out. Iggy, you want to give a quick introduction?
Yeah, I can do it. Hi, my name is Ignacio Carrasco. Go by Iggy. It makes it a lot easier on a lot of people. That's a great picture of me coming around the corner in the office, and they asked me to take a picture. Just drop my mask down real fast. But yeah, I'm really excited. This is a really cool series. There's been a lot of different webinar series in the history of Adigy, but I like the idea of exploring just the macOS scene and what we can do as people that use Mac to move that forward.
Yeah, I agree. They really like our marketing team really likes taking pictures of us, candid pictures of us, as soon as we pulled on our masks. So I don't know. It's they caught me a couple times in that, and it's all over the marketing material. And I see Ross made a great suggestion. Let me tell you, the pseudo talks was a very big debate. One of our biggest challenges here at Adigy tends to be naming things. It's not our expertise. But Ross actually came up with some really good ones off the fly, like pseudo dialogues or pseudo discussions. Pseudo discussions. I'm probably butchering the pronunciation, but I'm sure maybe Ross can kind of emphasize the enunciation or the pronunciation after the webinar here. So let's get right into it. The agenda. So we're going to be talking about testing and virtualization overview. Why you want to do it? How is it helpful? Why are we even doing this webinar? Then we're going to talk about testing using physical devices, meaning the actual devices we have on our desks, the ones we're connected with every day. Virtual devices, meaning like virtual machines. Using hosted solutions like AWS or MacStadium and some of the other offerings. How to test with the new Apple Silicon devices or the M1 devices or M1 Pro or M1 Pro Max or M1 Max, take your pick. And then testing advanced workflows and onboarding tools like automated device enrollment, DEP, pre-stage workflows, and other mechanisms. So really excited to talk about all these different options you have to test. So let's get right into it. So testing and virtualization overview. What is the purpose of testing? So just kind of straight to the point, you definitely want to test. We definitely recommend testing kind of all the different onboarding workflows you could put together within Adigy, or different software installers, tools, user experiences, new mechanisms. I know we come out with a bunch of new stuff all the time, and you may want to test that out. You definitely want to test that out, I should say, before you roll it out to your customers. Not to say that it won't work right, but the user experience may change. They may be expecting a button where the button is no longer there. They may be expecting having to type in their username and create an account when you're using some other mechanism to create accounts. It's just best practice to test changes before you roll them out. And that's why we're talking and hosting this webinar today, because, you know, you definitely want to test that stuff out, especially if you're changing your existing workflow where you know how it works, you have a standard operating procedure, you've taught the engineers or techs that report to you or kind of handle that onboarding process to do it in a certain way. And if you change it, it could disrupt that workflow and they may not know what to do and they'll reach out to you in a panic and so on and so forth. And why do we want to virtualize? Well, it's historically easier than testing with physical machines. If you've had to rebuild a physical machine, you kind of can feel my pain in my voice as I say this, but like sometimes it can take 2 to 3 hours and you'll get like errors along the way and internet recovery errors and the machine is too hot errors and all sorts of problems that you run into. And it just used to take a really long time. We'll talk about some of those new features and try and show them off actually on this webinar. Um, it allows you to roll back to specific changes. That's huge. That's really huge, because what you can do is you can test the workflow. You can take a snapshot before you make that change, roll back to that snapshot in a matter of seconds, and then retest the change. And you can go through that whole workflow process in a matter of minutes instead of hours. And it's easy to clone, repeat, and reproduce workflows without building the hardware to support your use cases. So that's really why people virtualize and why we test. That doesn't mean you have to virtualize to test. In fact, I definitely, and we're going to talk about some of the pros and cons here about testing with virtual machines versus physical hardware, and what will work and what won't work based on what we've seen in our experiences doing so on a regular basis. So I'm about to hand this off to Iggy now, but we're going to first talk about testing with physical devices. And I saw someone on the Apple developer forums, and I saved the screenshot, but the quote was, "If you can't afford to buy more devices, you shouldn't be in this business." And I think that is kind of an unrealistic expectation. Nobody can afford to buy 100 iOS devices just to keep around for testing purposes, right? Like that's just impractical. I'm sure Apple would love that. It will increase their multi-billion trillion dollar revenue, but that's just not realistic, right? Like we need to be able to test and do repeatable tests without having to buy an infinite amount of devices. So on that note, we're going to talk about testing with physical devices, and having a finite amount of devices physically in person makes it challenging, and all that stuff. So Iggy, why don't you take it away from here, and let's just talk about testing with physical devices and doing repetitive tests with them.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you for handing that off. Yeah, so the biggest thing I think with testing physical devices, which was the biggest pain point, was repurposing devices in order to get those tests going back up. We always want a clean slate. And now we can actually test much faster with physical devices and do repetitive tests much faster, so you can feel much more safe. Um, the way we can do that is now using erase all contents and settings. Apple's put out a really nice way, exactly how it was, almost like on the iPhone, where you just go into settings, you click erase all contents and settings, and it's back up. It's now on the devices and on now leverageable via MDM. So it just makes it really easy. Um, it's gonna rebuild the device and try and repurpose the macOS build without actually having to, wipe a drive clean and sit there for hours and reinstall macOS and make sure everything's back up, and it's going to save us a lot of time. In Adigy, we can leverage erase all contents and settings if you have a T2 or M1 device and go live. So if you're testing with a device that's in Adigy, or let's say you're testing automated device enrollment, there's going to be times where, okay, that deployment of automated device enrollment happened really well, but I want to see it again. So you just go in, erase all contents and settings, and you'll be back up in a matter of minutes to retest maybe a different iteration of the workflow or different mechanisms that way. But then we talk about devices that are not on Monterey or do not have T2 or M1, and then that's where the pain points of physical devices came first. I know Ponce, me and you both have had our fair share of having to repurpose devices, and sometimes we start repurposing those devices, and it could take X amount of hours, but sometimes you just have a rebuild and you forget it, and then by the time it comes back up, it's been so long. So I really like the feature set of erase all content settings, EACS, Eacs, however people want to say it. It's a great feature. You're 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 muted, Bounce.
Thank you. Sorry.
Yeah,
Um,
it's all good.
I probably won't be the last time I make that mistake here, so bear with us. Um, we got a couple questions. We're gonna answer them in just a second here. But just to kind of reiterate, um, you know, what are the differences between testing a physical device and a virtual machine? And really, there are I have seen some virtualization software work in a sense with some of these functionality, but by and large, the only real way to test some of these features is with physical devices, right? Um, and what I mean by some of these features is specifically like device lock, software updates that require a Bridge OS update. Bridge OS is kind of like the firmware that exists between the operating system and the physical machine. Apple updates that Bridge OS, which requires a kind of a, when they do the software update, the machine. I'm not sure if you've seen this before, but it will shut down and then it'll start back up, and then it'll shut down again and come back up. That's when in the process of doing that Bridge OS update. That can only be done once ever. So like even if we'll talk about taking snapshots on a machine, even if you do a snapshot on the machine, that Bridge OS update will never be reverted back. You'll always have to retest on a new machine, which is a bit of a pain and really challenging to test software updates because then you really do need those physical devices to test that workflow. Device lock and device wipe use the recovery partition. In most virtualization software, they don't have a recovery partition to leverage that mechanism. So what will usually end up happening is you'll see that device will like restart for a second and then come back up and nothing will happen. Um, and the same thing with activation lock. You just can't test activation lock without a physical device because it requires this chipset, and it can't be done through a virtual machine. So um, there are some features you just need a physical device to test with, and unfortunately that you can't replicate on a virtual machine as far as we've kind of explored. um, we're curious to know if anybody has kind of been able to work around those, depending on, I know on certain virtualization software I've gotten the device lock and device wipe to kind of simulate mainly the device lock, but that's kind of really um, the big differences between testing with a physical device and why you want to test with a physical device. And as Iggy pointed out, the EACS, or erase all contents and settings, someone mentioned we should expand on what that acronym means, and we should have. Sorry. Erase all contents and settings is a new feature they launched on Monterey, and you can't use it unless your device is on Monterey and has this chipset. But it makes it really easy to just erase and rebuild the machine. And let's say the machine isn't. I'm gonna take a second here. Let's say the machine isn't on um, uh, in MDM. You can still actually use the EACS option here. Sometimes like you just want to do it really quickly. So you just open system preferences. You can actually kick it off natively um, within the actual machine itself, regardless if it's MDM enabled or not, which is nice to have. And then where is EACS? So um, let me actually pull that up really quickly before we move on, just to kind of give everybody a level set of where in the interface we're talking about. Where you just go to erase a device now, and if you're familiar with that modal, then you will be familiar with kind of where it is today. And you just come here, erase device, and you'll have this option EACS to kind of do that. Let's go back to the slide and let's continue on here. Sorry for disrupting you again in the middle, but I just wanted to
No,
call that out.
it's all right. There's back to the point of testing on physical machines. Before the days of erase all contents and settings and EACS, we were trying to explore what can make it quicker. And I know that there's on the device there's the TMU util, or the time the time machine utility command that's able to create a local snapshot that you're able to revert back to. Um, but point of note that that only exists for about 24 hours. So when you're doing those snapshots and reverting back using tmutil, um, we need to keep track of that time. But also, as Ponce noted, it won't take into effect the snapshots that are taken and updated when doing things like the Bridge OS system updates and stuff like those non-revertible types of updates. But it is something that is a very useful feature when using that. So essentially, you can run tmutil space local snapshot, and it's going to create that local snapshot, and then you're able to revert to that local snapshot using tmutil again, and then it's going to just reboot your device into that last snapshot, and then you'll be in a quote unquote fresh environment with a local device.
Awesome. Thank you, Iggy. So yeah, we were really excited with this when this first launched a couple years ago, the local snapshot. You could take a local snapshot. It's really good for kind of simulating kind of like a VM snapshot. But again, with the BridgeOS update, it's not going to snapshot that. You won't be able to kind of like test software updates with this stuff. Trust us, we've tried. Um, but it does give you a nice rollback option. Let's say you want to make a quick change, and you're not sure what the outcome is, just take a snapshot. Worst case, within the next day it'll be deleted if you don't need it. Um, so just a really powerful feature, really cool, but a nice way to kind of test changes without having virtual hardware or virtual software, I should say. So yeah. Next slide. Sorry about that.
Yeah, no, it's okay. And then moving away from physical machines, we're going into, our VMs, our virtual machines. Um, there are plenty of tools out there that you can virtualize with. Uh, we have seen a lot of people use, any sort of machine to do it, but we recommend using the macOS as your host device. Personally, we use Parallels, but there's VirtualBox, VM Fusion, VMware Fusion, VMware ESXi for full server and stuff like that. Um, but just the normal use cases of VMs is the same way how we would advise and recommend for use cases of VMs is just setting it up and being able to run your tests multiple times using snapshots, reverting back. And I think that's where the really big powerhouse of using VMs really comes from. Especially like in specific, to our case using Adigy, you can test out deployments, repurpose it, have it re-enroll real quick back in, and then test those deployments all over again in a fresh slate. And what we're also going to get into in a bit is VMs are also able to be enrolled and test using automated device enrollment. So you're going to be able to spoof your serials, you're going to be able to spoof hardware models and have the device function in a way that the virtual machine function in a way that you didn't know could, but it's very very powerful and helpful when it comes to narrowing down and reducing the amount of time you spend testing so you can spend your time elsewhere.
Yeah, 100%. I think right, like snapshots is huge. We internally use Parallels. And we're going to talk about this in later on in the presentation, but it's one of the few tools we've actually got to work on silicone devices at this point. Well, we'll get into that when we talk about it. I'll just leave it there. Um, really, we have seen really good results with most of these tools on Intel-based machines. Is what we'll see. Um, and Parallels by far we have seen has the most feature-rich functionality from our testing. But yeah, we got a question. Actually, you can run macOS on ESXi, and historically, yes, we could, and we have done it before. And we actually have a document, and there's actually some pretty good write-ups out there if you're interested in it. That we found on how to do it. I'll send those, but these were mainly in the days of Sierra and High Sierra before they really went down the road of APFS volumes and whatnot. I'm gonna send the article from several years ago now at this point, but you may be able to still get it working. It is, I would say not as performant as just running Parallels natively. I sent that in the chat if you're interested in reading that. But yeah, we definitely recommend Parallels as the most performant. But we have seen others use VirtualBox or VMware Fusion, and so on and so forth. So we'll actually try and do some demos of these at the end of this webinar here. So we'll show you guys firsthand. Mainly, what
Yep.
we really like with Parallels is the ability to test ADE enrollment. And I'm gonna try and copy this link here and send it to you. So zero-touch deployment, automated device enrollment is something we all are moving towards, right? But how do you test that, right? Like, because that device only gets enrolled once, and then you can't redo it, you can't re-simulate it, and that's where Parallels comes in. And I have seen it done with the other some of the other virtualization software. It's just a little bit more challenging. But with Parallels, you can actually change some of the boot flags to give it a specific serial number. And the way Apple Business Manager is designed is that these devices all enroll based on their serial number. So some people consider it a security risk, but either way, it's can be done through Apple. I saw some people discussing like whether they should name their devices by their serial numbers or not. I will say that if you have someone's serial number, you can spoof an automated device enrollment. If there's no password protection on the automated device enrollment, they'll just enroll kind of the way it is through any MDM provider. No, even I would say even Apple Business Essentials, which just came out, right? Like this is the way they designed the protocol. So if you just plug in a serial number as a boot flag, it'll allow you to simulate that automated device enrollment like you're that device. So you'll go to that same policy, get those same configuration settings. If you're using AdG identity, that'll all automatically deploy. If you're using virtualization software from a software perspective, you'll get that exact user experience. The end user will. When they first boot up that device, which is priceless because you can only do that so many times on physical hardware. And a lot of times when we get physical hardware, those are going to employees, right? They're not for us to kind of just play around with all day. So this article was a really good article we found several years ago to do that. We use it regularly here. As another alternative, if you wanted to kind of not simulate automated device enrollment, you could just make up serial number like we just did, and it wouldn't go through that automated device enrollment process. So you'd just be able to kind of simulate a normal device provisioning if you didn't want it to automatically hook into your DEP account or automated device enrollment account. So yeah, and Ross asked to relink that article. Yeah, and we will definitely will, and we'll actually show this live in person, so you can get a good feel for kind of what happens. I will say it's automated device enrollment just in general is kind of like a very carefully planned orchestration, if you will. Like if one thing doesn't get done right, automated device enrollment isn't going to work, right? Like if Apple turns on the computer before they ship it out for some reason, which they've been known to do, automated device enrollment won't work. So, um, you know, getting all these kind of bells and whistles right and in a certain workflow and synchronized at the same time, and it's just very, a process, if you will. So, what we recommend is like whenever you set these boot flags, especially with Parallels, you do it as soon as possible. So as soon as you build the VM, go ahead and shut it down, set these boot flags. We'll have Iggy walk through this process at the end here, but it just makes it work kind of 100% consistent if you do the same things every time. So if you turn on the VM and don't put these boot flags, it's obviously not going to go to automated device enrollment. It'll just, what will happen actually is Parallels will piggyback off your serial number. So whatever the serial number of your existing device is, if that's in automated device enrollment or not, will dictate if it actually goes through that experience. If it is an automated device enrollment, what will happen is it will actually piggyback off your production account and may end up in your employee, managed device policy instead of like a test policy. So that's kind of this link, I'll send it out. It's pretty gold. So we'll also walk you through kind of how to do it. So hosted solutions. There's several hosted solutions out there. What's the benefit of hosted solutions? Well, I'll say first and foremost, it makes your life easier. You don't have to worry about reprovisioning or rebuilding devices. Um, there are a couple out there that we've used or use today, like MacStadium, Amazon Web Services. If you haven't heard of a company called Anka, um, it's under the umbrella of Virtu. They also have a Orca as well for kind of orchestration of VMs. I will say that none of these allow you to test the automated device enrollment experience, mainly because most of these vendors are hosting machines for you. And that's kind of a prerequisite to virtualize on macOS, is that you must virtualize macOS on macOS. Obviously, not everybody follows those rules, but I would say by and large, MacStadium and these vendors do. MacStadium literally is just, from what they advertise, is just a bunch of Mac Minis in some closet somewhere in some facility somewhere, right? So um, there's pros and cons. You don't get full control of these devices. You obviously can't test automated device enrollment, but it is good just to test basic OS functionality. So, um, you know, pros and cons to everything. This obviously costs quite a bit different. Buying a physical hardware or running virtualization software is kind of like, you pay for that software, that service, or that machine one time, or like once a year, and you're done with it. But these services are more as pay as you go, or pay as you use, or based on consumption. So if you're not using them, you're still paying for them. If you want to terminate them, you can, but then if you want to use them again, you have to pay for them. So there's definitely cost benefit analysis you need to do, if you're using hosted solutions to test. So definitely something you want to keep in mind. And also the fact that you can't test all the different workflows is something you definitely want to keep in mind with these solutions. I will say MacStadium, from my experience, has been the easiest to kind of just get up and running. Amazon Web Services, like, you actually have to build like a bare metal hosted instance for you that they keep running, and it's a pretty beefy machine that will cost you a pretty penny just to get some basic macOS functionality. So that's kind of the story with hosted solutions, and where you want to use them versus where you may not want to use them, and what the pricing looks like. Testing with Apple Silicon devices. I'm actually using an M1 device right now. I'll kind of walk through kind of what I can do on this device today. But what you'll find is that vendor support for virtualization on Apple Silicon is lackluster, mainly because the Apple insisted that Rosetta can translate any application and make a seamless transition for your end users from Intel to M1, but that isn't the case, right? In reality, Rosetta wasn't really designed for that. Rosetta was definitely not designed to render kernel extensions or translate kernel extensions. It just wasn't, never will be. So all these vendors, like virtualization software specifically, but it could even go into antivirus vendors, all had to rewrite their software, or are still rewriting their software and trying to adopt the new system extension framework. Unfortunately, the system extension framework just isn't there yet. It's a new mechanism that Apple's working on. It should get there eventually, but it leaves some pretty big feature gaps. For example, with Parallels, which is one of the few vendors we actually got to kind of say they support M1 devices and virtualizing on M1 devices, and their main priority was Windows, virtualizing Windows on macOS. So in this case, if you're virtualizing macOS with macOS hardware on M1 devices, you're going to lose some functionality or feature capabilities you have on Intel devices. You can't manage any BIOS settings. You can't take or manage any snapshots. No ability to simulate automated device enrollment settings. They actually make you in order to do this, they make you download a custom build. I put ISO, but it's more of like an IPA file, kind of similar to an iPhone, that they download and install for you. And it's really like their custom build of macOS Monterey, and it only supports macOS Monterey, which is another pretty important thing to know. So if you wanted to test anything besides Monterey, you wouldn't be able to. So you know, by and large, like our team internally, we don't let the people that need to virtualize get on M1 device yet until there's feature parity, because they can't do their job very well and test things without being able to virtualize, especially on macOS. So that's kind of the story with Apple Silicon. I'll show kind of how it looks on my device. I will say on Apple Silicon, if you just need to test basic OS functionality or software functionality, it works pretty well, and it's really fast and performant compared to the its predecessor on the Intel chips. So we'll talk about that in a second. So when you do set up your Parallels VMs or whatever virtualization software you use, and you change the boot flags to have a serial number, for example, what that will allow you to do is kind of simulate an experience like this. And I'm gonna force fell already. So this is Adigy identity, testing an Adigy identity. So at this point, I'm gonna just pause. Whoops, I'm gonna pause it here for a second. So at this point, we built a VM. You can see it's a VM here, and just based off the menu bar that you see at the top. But we just changed the boot flag so that when it gets that main screen where it says "Hello, welcome," you click continue. It's automatically connected to the network because it's piggybacking off your host machine. It's gonna try and connect to Adigy. You press continue, and it's gonna connect to Adigy MDM and try and set everything up. So in this case, it's gonna deploy all the MDM settings and then try and deploy Adigy identity. So we'll talk about some of those feature functionalities we have in Adigy and why this could take in some cases longer than others. But in this case, it's just a very plain install with just basic settings and Adigy identity. And what will happen here is, it just walks through those settings, deploys those settings, mainly MDM configurations, and then bootstraps Adigy identity through the window. So if you wanted to test like what would Adigy identity look like in a specific workflow with automated device enrollment, this essentially would allow you to do that. And you can obviously do it with different workflows as well. So let's take a look here. So I'm gonna back out here for a second, and just to quickly show what Parallels looks like, and I'm gonna queue up Iggy here. He's gonna show you kind of how to build a macOS VM with DEP. Yeah, and Eric, we're gonna answer that question in just a second here. Iggy's gonna show that in just a second. This is so about this Mac, I'm gonna show you. This is an M1 Pro on 12.3.1. So it does have some of the limitations. If I go to build a new VM, it actually gives me this prompt that says, hey, you have an M1 chip, you're limited as to what you can do. And that's mainly because of the processor type of the machine, M1 chip, right? And it's going to give me these options where I can, download some flavors of Linux if I wanted to, or download macOS. And really, that's the only option I have. If you had an Intel machine, which Iggy will show in just a second here, is that it will allow me to build it from my recovery partition, which is 10 times easier, 10 times faster, because you don't need an installer. It'll just use your recovery partition to build it. If I click continue here, it's going to download a custom built installer they have. And what they did here, we're not 100% sure. This is some proprietary stuff Parallels did to make this kind of magic work, if you will. I'm gonna save myself from pressing download to save my bandwidth here for this webinar, but essentially you download it and it creates like a macOS 12 VM. And again, there's no real capabilities here. All you can really do is just boot the VM. It's super fast, mainly because I can't do much with it, but come on, baby. There we go. You can't control any of the BIOS settings. You can't control the you know snapshots and stuff like that. You can install Parallels tools, so you can copy and paste from a limited extent. But M1 chips still got some room to grow, if you will. So this is kind of you know all you can really do with M1 devices, but it is extremely fast. Like you'll see on Iggy's machine, if you're running an Intel machine, it's really slow. Well, I shouldn't say that. Depending on how powerful your machine is and how many VMs you're running, and if you're doing like a webinar and have like a million Chrome tabs, but like who doesn't have a million Chrome tabs open, right? It'll start kicking up the fans on the Intel machines. They'll start phoning home and telling Apple what's going on or whatnot. But this is super fast. You can run multiple at the same time, and is extremely performant. Just when those features get there, this will be the new way of doing things. If those features get there, our hope is that they will. So I'm gonna turn it over to. We're getting a bunch of questions, and I want to turn it over to Iggy so he can demo kind of what that looks like from an Intel machine where you can do this. Um, and Ross asked a good question. Does EACS work in parallels on an M1 VM? I'm not 100% sure, but we can definitely try it on this webinar. I'll prepare this machine while Iggy does his thing over there on that side. Iggy, go ahead and share your screen if you can. I'll prepare this machine. We can answer Ross's question. But in the interim, let's show everybody how you can simulate kind of an automated device enrollment, how Parallels is set up and whatnot from a
Yeah, if I'm going to grab the correct screen, here we go. All right, just making sure my screen's showing okay. Actually, there we go.
Yeah, I don't see
It
it right
should be
now.
showing correctly.
Yeah, I see it now. I see it now. Yep.
Cool. All right. So this is where this how at least parallel VMs looks like on your dashboard in Parallels when you're running it. Personally, and best recommendation, we like to use 2 to 3 of the previous macOS versions to really hammer down what every single different version of macOS functions like. We know that every year with every release of macOS, there's little subtle changes that sometimes mean the world when it comes to deploying MDM or deploying software. So we think best practice, have a couple of different settings and versions of macOS in there and really hammer it hard. But for setting up a VM, as Ponce was alluding to, if you're on an Intel device with an existing recovery partition, you can scroll all the way to the right in Parallels and use your recovery partition. And that's going to go ahead, it's going to dedicate some of your disk space and start that virtualization process. And then it's going to kick you right into the VM. And then as long as you're paying attention and you're quick with it, you can turn it off, really suspend it, and then start editing some of those settings. This is really good because you don't need to dedicate any more of your extra disk to downloading, different installation versions of macOS. Like, you'll probably have, like I have here, Catalina, Big Sur, Monterey, XYZ versions of each of those, and it's going to be taking a lot of their. Oh, I see that from Montgomery. That's a little internal joke that we have with Monterey, but we're just gonna leave it at that. But I'm gonna go ahead. I'm gonna show what it looks like when you're actually using an actual macOS image, because Parallels gives you a really cool feature that allows you to pre-configure boot settings before actually turning on the VM, which allows us to not miss the timing when we're gonna go and set up those boot flags that I have here on the side of how we want to set up those VMs for automated device enrollment testing. So we're gonna go ahead and click the option. Sorry about that, was a little quick. The option is going to read install Windows or another OS from DVD or image file. We're going to go ahead and click that as a CD, mounted DMG or USB key kind of image. We're going to click continue. And then here I have this install macOS Big Sur.app file in my applications folder, and it reads it pretty quickly. But if you have it somewhere else that it's not picking it up from, you can choose manually. It's going to pop up your Finder. You'll be able to locate the image. But as long as it's the install macOS .app files, it works relatively well. So you're gonna go ahead and click continue. It's gonna tell you that you're gonna need to create some sort of disk space. This one in particular is about 13 gigabytes. I always recommend giving it a good, unique name if you're gonna have multiple VMs running. So this one we're just gonna call a webinar demo. We're gonna
Yeah,
save it.
I also like to call it the OS name because like sometimes I have all these image files and they take up like
Right.
13 gigs each, and it's like, whoa, where did all my disk space goes? And I went to
Hmm.
Parallels. So one other
Yeah,
nice thing about this, right, Iggy, is that like you can use external drives to put these they're like
exactly.
VHD files, and like if you don't want all this on your local solid state, you can like I would recommend buying like an external solid state, definitely not a non-solid state, or else you're going to be waiting like we see here for hours.
Oh man, we got a
Looks
quick error there. Let's not hang that up. We'll just go ahead and use the recovery partition.
yeah.
But I'll show you how quick it's gonna have to be actually, what it's gonna look like when you go. So here, when you're installing from the recovery partition, you get a bit of flavor text telling you that, it needs to be connected from the internet. It's gonna be grabbing it from the recovery partition, and it's gonna grab the latest release of your version downloaded from Apple and installed. So we're gonna go ahead, we're gonna install it.
So I guess the big difference between what you were doing and this is that for the other implementation, you needed a custom installer downloaded. Like you needed
Right.
the Big Sur app, the install macOS app, whatever it
Here we
is.
go.
But this
There
is
we go. It's
yeah.
starting back up, and I want to stop it real quick. If I had click into it, click actions, it's going to say operation failed to execute. Um, I'm not sure, but here we are. This is a VM that was created. I stopped it as quick as I could to make sure nothing started loading, and I can hit this little gear, and then it's going to give us these configuration options, and then we can head over to hardware and scroll down all the way here to boot order. But what we actually want to look on is here. So we're going to click advanced, and it's going to show us this boot flag pop up. And then in the KB that we're going to be sending out from Parallels, actually there's the boot flags that they provide there. So it's going to say devices.smbios.serial, and then it's going to be the serial number that you're going to be passing in there. And then devices.mac space hardware space model. It's going to be the hardware model. Um, I'm not sure if this is really required. I haven't really seen it required. I've ran VMs where just the serial number is required and we get to spoof it. But this is really good for testing things like, if it's a specific, if there's a specific hardware model that needs certain testing from a command and system profiler that you want to look into. This is another good flag to look into and another good use case. So for this one, we're just going to go ahead. We're going to use the serial number. We're going to copy it in here. We're going to click OK.
And yeah, Iggy, lock that, and then go to there was a question I think on go to hard disk. What's the default? Maybe go
I
to
think
options
it's
40
pretty, I
gigs.
think I think it's expandable based on your disk and how much you have, but you can hard set it. Yeah, I
No,
think,
go to like options because you can. Yeah, one of the questions was like, what's the minimum space you can allocate? And was it 60 gigs? And I think they generally speaking give like 40 to 60 gigs for these VMs, mainly because the operating system takes about like 30 gigs. So like you know, just so that the machine doesn't die as soon as you build it, it gives it like 40 to 60
yeah,
gigs, something like that. And you can
for sure give
it's
yourself,
yeah.
yeah, I
I'm
would
sorry.
give yourself a good amount of headroom if you're going to be running VMs. Um, you don't want to try to squeeze them all into your disk because then you'll see a whole bunch of performance issues. I remember one time I had about like 5 VMs running, and I had to just delete a whole bunch of them and the snapshots that I had just because it was just starting to move way too slow for it to be actually productive.
Yeah, and
Um,
and back to the point where you can put those disks on a external drive. Parallels will recognize them and even run them from the external drive if you wanted to. So you don't have
right.
to hold all these machines on your physical disk if you wanted to like not claim all that disk space, which is, you know, is a challenge because some of these machines still ship with like 256 gigs, which is like is less than an iPhone these days. So
Yeah, there you go. I don't know if this is what you also wanted to see, but Parallels allows you to also like resource limit some of your VMs. So if you're running things in tandem and the what you're running on your VM isn't going to need to be so like resource heavy, and you just want it to be kind of running there for stability purposes, you can limit it so it's not consuming too much of your actual workstation. But let's get back into setting it up. So we unlocked the settings. We added these advanced boot settings. We go ahead and we padlock it. Um, and then we close it. And then here you're gonna see that it's suspended. And we're gonna go ahead and start it back up. This process is gonna be quite long just
yeah,
because it needs to install macOS from the image and make sure it's all set up. It might take a little bit of time, and if by the time it's up and running before the webinar closes and Pons shows us what we need to show, I can share my screen again. But from here, it should be almost like the same process of what you would experience if you're completely like going down the nuclear option of wiping a whole device down and reformatting from internet recovery mode. It's almost that exact experience from when you're setting up these VMs.
yeah. This is a pain point that you'll have, right? Where it's like, and now it takes time for because it still
Yeah,
has to install macOS fresh on this disk from scratch, which takes, as we all know,
yeah,
probably like 30, 40 minutes minimum. Um, what I will say is that right before it's finished, what we usually recommend, Iggy, go ahead and demo this. Just go to Actions, take a snapshot, and this will allow you to um, take a point in time snapshot before it actually goes through that configuration. So I wouldn't do it at this point because like the install, like it hasn't installed macOS yet. So like, like you haven't really got much progress in, but like before it's finished installing macOS, like you can really easily rebuild the machine by just reverting back to the snapshot, retesting automated device enrollment over and over and over again. And that is a really nice workflow to use. As you can see here, like he can now Iggy will have like a machine in its current state, and he needs to roll back and go back to the environment where it was fresh install. He can just say, let's go back there um, really quickly without having to do anything but a couple clicks of a button. So just makes testing a whole lot easier.
and you can retroactively start releasing some of those unused snapshots as you're going to make sure you get the most efficient snapshot possible. Um, that too. This is a pretty safe screen to be at because this is before it tries to hit the internet, so this is pretty good. Um,
Yeah, actually, this is
and
like
then,
the install OS screen. So like, yeah,
mhm,
like you're gonna go through the. Go ahead and go through this. And it'll just like tell you it's gonna install macOS.
yeah,
Um, so one thing to add to what Iggy was just mentioning is why you kind of want to consolidate snapshots is because it will consume, like the more snapshots you take, the more disk space it will consume, just like anything else. Like if you're familiar with VMware ESXi, same thing, right? Like it's going to save the snapshot to the data store, and that disk image will get larger and larger and larger over time, and you may want to save some space somehow. So just something to keep in mind. Um, but as you can see here, it's going to install macOS Monterey. It's going to take some time. Just for the sake of time, Iggy, I'm going to share my screen and do another workflow
go for it.
while we wait here. Let me see how I can share my screen.
I
Uh,
got away from.
let me make presenter, share my screen. Okay, all right. Um, so I'm going to try and do this. It's going to be a little uh, difficult to show, but let's see if we can do it. So I have, if you can see my screen, I have this device analogy. It's called Hello123. Very creative names. And I have this machine. and I'm not sure if you guys can see it. Let me actually, let me see, this virtual background is getting in the way. So let me change it to nothing. Is that possible? Let's see if I lose my, sure. I think I got frozen here. Let me share my webcam one more time. And it's starting back up. All right, I think we got this now. All right, so here's this machine. I'm gonna hold it up here on screen. All right. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna erase a device, and this is the workflow we were talking about just now. I would show you the device name, but it's a little bit challenging since both my hands are occupied. I'm just gonna put some arbitrary code here because we're just gonna erase the device and rebuild it through EACS. So here's the feature we've kept talking about. It is a new feature in Monterey, EACS. We're gonna erase this device. Obviously you wanna be careful running this because it will just hard erase the device and you'll lose everything. So make sure you got the right machine and whatnot before you do it. As you can see, the machine looks like it's still on. I'm not really sure if it's responding or not because I can't really see it from this angle, but soon enough it should. Oh, there it goes, and you can see my college sports team that I like there, but in the reflection, and it's just gonna erase and rebuild this machine, and it's crazy how fast this thing will go. It's still black screen. What will happen now is it's going to go to the activation lock window, just like an iPhone almost, and try and activate itself. There was a bug in one of the early builds of Monterey that like it had to be connected to Wi-Fi on the Mac Mini, and still doing his thing. We got some questions. I'll answer in just a second here, once I can type and move my mouse.
I mean, there's one that Brian asked asking, do you find that Parallels lets you manage the amount of processors per VM to boost performance? And can the entry-level M1 run the host OS and multiple VMs at the same time in your experience? I
Yes,
haven't.
you can manage different, you can give it as many cores as you want. So if you want to make that thing a beefing machine, you can. But can the entry-level M1 run the host and multiple VMs at the same time? I guess it depends on the entry-level M1. So just before we answer that question, this activation lock screen is obviously going to restart here in 45 seconds. So I'm just going to speed this up for the sake of time. I'm just going to press the restart button here. As you can see, I'm not doing anything special. And it's just going to restart. And just like that, it's going to come back here. And there you go. It's going to now go through the initial enrollment experience as soon as it's done here. So it takes, obviously the 60 seconds for activation lock to go through, which, you can, if you have hands on site, you can tell them to just press the restart button for you, but that's not always the case. So it will just automatically do it for you. So you don't actually have to touch anything. Once it rebuilds here, I think now it should just go to the first time hello, how, all the different languages window. Come on. I guess the entry level M1 is probably a MacBook Air with just the basic M1 chip. And I have seen in our experience that it works pretty well with multiple VMs, but again, the functionality is kind of limited. So you can't do everything you want it to do or everything you expect it to do as easily. but it does, in our opinion, or I'm probably in my opinion, that it runs better in quotes than the Intel machines, mainly just because it doesn't make as much noise and the fans don't go crazy and it doesn't turn into like a toaster oven where you can heat your toast off of it. So,
Yeah, I was about to say something there. So like the machine that I'm running right now is a 2.7 gigahertz quad core Intel Core i7 with 16 gigs of RAM. So it's a 2018 MacBook Pro, and I feel safe running about two VMs, running at like the stock CPU speeds that Parallels puts them at. Um, they do slow down a bit, and the computer starts sounding like it's going to start levitating off the desk at some point, but it does run. Um, I don't like keeping it at that level for very long, just because of, battery life, and keeping the computer at a high thermal state for too long is not very good. But other than that, I mean, it can do it.
all right. So I don't know if you follow me. I just pressed on the hello screen. I just clicked the button and it passed that. And then I picked what country, and it starts at Afghanistan because it's and I put United States, and ask for accessibility, and I'm gonna put not now, and then ask like everything else, connect to the Wi-Fi, right? I'm gonna connect to the Wi-Fi here. I'm just gonna take this down so I can type like a human being. Um, and I'm going to press continue here and then bring it back up. And you're gonna see it's gonna connect to the internet. You can see in the bottom corner the little pinwheel spinning, thinking, connecting to the internet. And then after that, now I'm at the remote management screen and I can test the whatever kind of automated device enrollment experience. So let's actually really quickly try it out. So let's press continue. In our automated device enrollment screen, in this example, as you can see, we have a payload, a passcode payload for, we did this as part of the MSP webinar series that we were demoing. I know my webcam's not the best, so it's kind of blurry, but you can actually, I'm just gonna put this down for a second. And if you're interested in actually seeing where that stuff is, you can actually configure it under settings, automated device enrollment. And you can actually put a passcode so that people can enroll into your machine automatic or into your policy automatically. You can put text, usually like a EULA is good for companies like, hey, this machine is not for torrenting or whatever else, right? So I'm gonna put in the passcode payload here. I mean, the passcode that we defined in Adigy. Otherwise they can't enroll their machine, they're stuck. And then once they put the password, they get the EULA that I put, and they have to accept and continue. And then once they accept and continue, it's going to start installing the enrollment profile and doing all the good stuff we defined it to do. So we actually have a feature in private beta. If you guys are interested, we're really excited about, and you should see things coming out about it called pre-enrollment. So like if you wanted specific workflows to happen at a specific time, or like DEP Notify or Splash Buddy. I know we've been working with a couple of our clients to kind of set that up already, but ultimately, if you're interested in it, all it really takes is just you come into like whatever software you wanna modify or want to install first, and you can um, where is it? You can put a installation priority on it. So pre-stage you could just put like 0.1 or 0.2, and it'll install before everything else during pre-stage enrollment, which is really cool because now you can put like specific splash screens during the setup assistant. This essentially finished and went to the user creation, and it's all good. I can create the user now. The device should even be checking into Adigy here. And you can see it's online back in the same policy. There was a question. I know we're at the hour here, so I want to get some questions in. So will that work from changing one device from one policy to another? So because I didn't remove this device from Adigy, it essentially saw that it was the same device and remapped the record. If you remove the device from Adigy, it will not do that behavior. So I guess it really depends on what expectation you want that workflow to have. So if you wanted to go into an wherever automated device enrollment is, or wherever ADE is set up, but you don't want it to go back to wherever wherever the device was and whatever policy it was moved to, then remove the device from Allergy before you re-enroll.
Yeah.
Uh,
I was also going to point out with that question is that you can have multiple MDM servers set up in your Apple Business Manager account. And depending on if you want to drop it here or there, you can always remove it from Adigy, reassign it in Apple Business Manager and re-enroll it, making sure that it has, sorry, the correct assigned state in it in the enrollment status. And then you should see it just pop back up in the policy that you expect it to go into.
yeah, Ross asked a great question. Do you seriously need to put the 6-digit code when you use EACS? It just wipes and won't ask the right? It won't ask the 6-digit code because we're rebuilding it automatically, and it's just going to rebuild it, right? Like we don't want to go into Recovery OS and unlock it for it to rebuild automatically. That is something we've been debating about internally. The Apple documentation says you need it regardless, but
Yeah.
based on what we've seen and tested, it doesn't seem like it is required, and we're testing them more thoroughly to make sure we can do that before we just say, hey, you don't have to put a code. So we really want to like gray that out to your point, or just not even give that option when you click that checkbox. But it's something we're trying to confirm first before we actually just make that change.
EACS has a couple fallback options that it checks before it actually executes. Um, So we've tried to, like Pon said, we've been exploring it. We're not 100% sure if it's there as a failsafe for those things. You guys have probably heard Apple talk about obliteration behavior before, about like so where that's like the new wipe mechanism that they added in like Big Sur. Um, but that's like the obliteration behavior is like a backup now. So if EACS fails and you didn't force only wipe on EACS, it'll use that obliteration behavior. Um, it's hard to like force that state, but yeah, we're as Pon said, we're debating it internally.
Yeah, and another good call out, I don't know why it's super secretive from Apple's perspective about features that are already launched and in production, but at MacAduct this year, they talked about some of the requirements for EACS. And I'm not sure why they're not publicly documenting these, but the device does need a bootstrap token. The device does need some prerequisites. I don't have all of them off the top of my head, but I
Yeah.
can get them. Um,
Can't
um,
have a can't have a firmware level passcode on it.
yeah. There's a few requirements that EACS will not work on, which is um, it needs to be in full security mode, which is very important to know because I think some of us didn't know that, and I guarantee probably this might be something new for you, where it's like if you guys went into the recovery partition and clicked those checkboxes so you can manage software updates, because who doesn't need to manage software updates, right? Like that's like, I mean, hello, but like that, if you go and check those boxes on a T2 machine, it won't do any ACS. I don't know what the rationale is there.
Yeah.
Same thing with firmware password, to Iggy's point. If it's booted from an internal sealed system volume, it won't work. If it's booted from the first partition, if multiple exist, it will not work. So there are some caveats to EACS that we are learning.
There's different requirements even if it's a T2 or M1 device. It's like Pon said, it's hard to believe that some of it isn't public knowledge, and we've just been scraping and trying to find the information where we can to share.
Yeah, and Terry actually asked just that same question a couple minutes ago. So when we say if someone went into the recovery OS and checked those boxes and reduced the full security mode, what we're talking about is this warning here. You see, this MDM server requests the ability to manage kernel extensions and software updates. To allow this, reboot into the recovery, enable MDM management and startup security. Not only does you have to do this, you have to do it with the password of a secure tokenized user. If that user doesn't have a secure token, this won't work. But what this does is it just gives you two checkboxes that allows the MDM to manage both system updates and kernel extensions. I think it's two different flags, so you can choose which one. Either way, if you check those boxes, this will never go away from my understanding. This shows up based on the serial number of the device and if it's enrolled in DEP, since this is a Parallels VM. It's definitely not piggybacking off my serial number, because if if it did, it wouldn't show that. Here is my device, and my device doesn't show that. The reason why it shows that, it doesn't really matter how the device was enrolled. I hate to say that. It just matters if the device is assigned an Apple Business Manager. It seems like a bug to me, but I digress. What that really means is if the device is assigned an Apple Business Manager, you will not see this, and if it isn't, you will see this. And it just means that you have limited controls on M1 devices. We actually have a pretty good KB article. I'm gonna send in the chat here about this. Apple Silicon warning. So you, Terry asked, do you have to do this in person? I mean, generally speaking, yeah, because usually end users struggle to get into the recovery OS and change this stuff, and it's just a challenge. So I would say, yeah, usually better you do it in person. But do you really need to? I guess it really depends if you want to do MDM software updates on the machine, because kernel extensions are kind of deprecated in the newer operating system. So there really shouldn't be too many use cases for kernel extensions. But you know, you never know. There's all sorts of different things that people need. So I would say it's better that you help them do it than them trying to figure it out themselves. Here's the KB article. And then in the recovery OS, this must have been taken with the iPhone 7. It's probably my iPhone. And this is a screenshot of what you'll see in the recovery OS and what you need to do. So there are two separate checkboxes, but it looks like both of them both imply they're combined. So let me get the KB article, or the article for the spoofing the serial numbers, and where you can get those serial numbers to kind of test for a specific policy is under the policies. So I was in there earlier, policies, you go to your policy, and then you go to settings, automate device enrollment, you scroll down, and you'll see these serial numbers here will obviously map to this policy where I have all this configuration. So you can put whatever serial number you want to use based on whatever policy you want to send. So I just sent that link, Ross. If you need any help with this, feel free to reach out to me in Slack. But yeah, or anybody, really happy to help. We do this on a regular, and we have to train our employees kind of how to do this sometimes too, because they want to test stuff. So here's a question: how do you handle the ABM side of the adage enrollment? Are you hijacking another serialized device's number? So in this case, this device that I actually used right here is actually assigned to the server in Apple Business Manager, and you can see the serial number down here. This is the this is actually a bug with Apple Business Manager. In Apple Business Manager, it says it's a Mac Pro as well. This is obviously not a Mac Pro, but either way, you don't actually have to, like, if you're using Parallels, you don't actually have to use the serial number. You can actually use like a, you can go grab whatever serial number you see down here and simulate the enrollment without having to like assign a device manually. I'm gonna put the URLs again in the chat. And you should have them now. At least the one for simulating a DEP enrollment. So let me know if you guys don't have it, or if you lose it, feel free to DM me in Slack or put it in the Slack channels. I'll definitely send it to you guys. But yeah, that's kind of all we really had planned for this webinar. But we did want to leave it open for questions or comments, even though we've been kind of talking to specific questions. So, you know, Pseudo Talks is also about giving you guys the ability to kind of ask us questions and chat. So we'll be here for the next 10 minutes or so. If you guys have any questions, comments, feedback, concerns, if you found it useful, or would like to see something else next time, we're open to feedback. We just want to make kind of a valuable webinar experience for you guys and give you guys a forum to kind of talk to us and chat with us and ask us questions about things. So I've gotten a couple questions. Do we have, or do we record this, or will we be uploading this? Yes, we will. This is going to be our new webinar series. It's going to be landing pages for it, and you'll be able to ungated content that you can just join, watch at your own discretion. So if there was something you missed or something you wanted to rewatch, it will be available after the webinar. Obviously, it's going to take some time to convert the recording and publish it on the blog, but you know, that's kind of the goal of our sudo talks, and we hope you guys liked it. And we hope to see you. We're going to be doing them every month. Actually, you know what? Let me actually go back to the presentation and talk about that before I just call it. That might be a good idea. Let me put this back. There's going to be another one this month. We're going to try and do it once a month, but to kick them off, we might be doing a couple a month. The next one is April 26th, Ask a Hacker with Ralph Echemendia, 3 p.m. We're going to try and always do them Tuesday, 3 p.m. That night might not always work for everybody. So, you know, if you want to see them at different times, please let us know. We also want to be cognizant that some people can only do this during the day, during the workday. Some people can't during the workday. So feedback is definitely valued. And if you're new to Adigy or haven't heard about us before and this is your first webinar, check out Watch the Demo. We've talked about the product a little bit, but not too much. Just kind of use some of the features there. Feel free to call or email us. But going back, you can actually see that the machine is actually enrolled here, and you can fully control that machine. You can do another EACS if you wanted to in the matter of the next 7 minutes before we end this webinar. But yeah, and you can do all that stuff, and no user has actually logged in yet, which is pretty cool. So you can even live terminal the device, connect to it, do stuff to it if you needed to help the end user in certain circumstances. So yeah, that's really all we got. I know most of the people are dropping off, so thank you again, everybody, for spending your Tuesday afternoon with us. I know there's a lot of webinars out there you all could join, so we're really excited that you came. And if you have any feedback, comments, concerns, please share them with us. Otherwise, we're happy to do this again in a couple weeks and then again next month. So we'll be seeing you guys soon.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, guys. All right. Since we're not getting many questions, Terry asked us script variables yet. Not yet, but trust us, we're working on it. Me and Iggy test that to you. So
Big advocates on our side, we'll tell you that much.
That's right. Again, we talked about pre-stage enrollment functionality. If you're interested in beta testing that or being a tester in that or just playing with it, let us know. We can add you to the private beta. It should be launching into a public beta really soon here. But yeah, other than that, I think we're gonna call it. Most if not everybody has asked the questions, I think. So everybody have a great Tuesday and great week, and catch you in a couple weeks. Bye, guys.
Bye, everybody. Thank you again.